Hello and welcome to episode 147 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leach. Damien, how you doing? Sorry, I'm laughing.
I'm good, Andy. You're going to have to explain to people why you are laughing.
Well, for circumstances which we won't go into great detail right now, but we are currently recording this podcast in a car.
In a car, in a side street. So there's two men in a car in a side street with people's houses looking decidedly dodgy, and it's starting to steam up in here because it's a really damp day. So this is our level of dedication to this podcast, that we're recording it in such unusual circumstances, but it still works.
Yeah, it almost goes to prove that you know, podcasts aren't that difficult, really. You just need to...
we just make it difficult.
Yeah, we make it difficult for ourselves. You need the want and the drive, and pretty much, so long as you've got a microphone and a computer and one or two people that are willing to talk nonsense for half an hour, you've got yourself a podcast.
There you go. Go out there and do it and change the world. So, so what have you been up to, Andy, this week?
This week we've had a pretty special birthday in our household. I won't tell you how old my wife is, 40. And so we had this nice party with all friends and family, and it was rather lovely. You know, you have these anticipation of big events. I don't like parties personally. I don't like hosting parties for me because it's full of anxiety and worry about people having a good time and turning up. But I have to say, everyone who said they were going to turn up, turned up. We had a lovely time. There was no sort of... I don't know. I worry that people are going to fight. Let's be honest. When you book a wedding, you are worried that sets of people are going to get together under alcohol and fight at your wedding.
It's not a good wedding or party unless people do. I've been to weddings where it has erupted into fighting.
Really?
Yeah, I've been a guest gone later on, and then you see these people fighting, and you cheer, you pick your winner, you think you're going to win, and it's all like erupted. So yeah, good.
But it went well. What have you been up to?
Actually, what I've been up to is forms the basis of the first piece on this podcast. And I've been busy. I've been on the radio. So on Wednesday of this week, I spent the entire morning. I did 15 radio interviews on different radio stations around the UK, broadcast to about 2 million people apparently, talking about money and a particular survey that was going on about money and happiness and well-being. So we're going to touch upon that because some of the findings will be of interest to people anyway. So we're going to just talk around that. So that was really interesting. If you go onto Instagram or Facebook, you'll see some of the photos and video from the day, which gives you an insight into how this stuff works. So that was all good fun. Good.
So should we get straight onto that bit, or are you going to tell us what else is coming on?
Well, what else is coming on? We've got a bit about, as I say, this report. The other part is it's a reader question, actually. I could say listener question about currencies and hedging and interest rates. So it's an interesting topic. It's something that is going to come up time and time again. So I have agreed to cover it this week. And the other final thing is just a quick tip about car insurance that's come up. And it's actually came up via somebody who is a fan of this podcast, actually. So I'm going to mention it. So we'll jump straight on to the piece about happiness. Now, I was asked to go on various radio shows to talk about a piece of research that came out that looked at people's wealth and how happy they are, and more importantly, what they were prepared to do to improve their work-life balance. And now, anyone who listens to this podcast knows I'm all about work-life balance. I get it wrong sometimes I get it right. And the One Giant Leap podcast, he says, as he's a man in a car when he should be at home putting his children to bed.
Yeah. I gave you that. Did you see that look I gave?
Yeah, it was the look that people who listen to the podcast can't see. Two men in a car who probably just been told off by their wives.
Both told off by their wives for not coming home, yeah.
Yeah, that work-life balance is slightly wrong today, but we live and learn, Andy. So the point of this survey, they asked people to think about their own happiness and what could potentially make them happier when it came to money and their well-being, and also what could make them unhappy. And I just wanted to run through some of the things that were of interest. So of all the people that were surveyed, typically there were regional variations, but we'll focus on a whole. 62% of people said what really made them happy was spending time with their family and friends. And then there was a slightly strange 35% of people who just like to be on their own. I say strange, but they might just like their own company. People said travel was important to them, so about nearly a third said that more travel would make them happier. And getting healthy was also one of the big ones. So what was really coming out of this survey was to show that the drivers were time and spending time with their family was what made people happy. Now, on the flip side, if you look at it, what the things that made people unhappy or they were most worried about, strangely, it was, perhaps not strangely, one of the biggest was ill health, so they're worried about if they were unwell. The next one was about family, friends, and family and friends becoming unwell was the next biggest one. But then the next ones that came in, and I reckon this was partly due to the questions that were asked. Brexit, of all the things that people are worried about, Brexit was there, and terrorism was classed as some of the biggest reasons that they were worried about and could make them unhappy in the future. And then down in sort of one of the lower ones, fifth place was not being able to pay their bills. Now, when we looked at the survey, what was interesting is that people are very good at articulating what their concerns are, but clearly what they don't do is take any action to change their life or what their potential future could be. So for the things that make them happy, they won't make changes in life to necessarily go after them. Or if the things that are worried about, then they probably won't take, again, actions to try and minimise those impacts. So things like insurances. There are loads of insurance out there we talked about in the past. Income protection that can help if you become ill and unable to work. They'll pay you effectively an income. Now, the thing I really found interesting was the work-life balance angle. They actually asked people what they were prepared to do. So if you listen to this part of the survey, that's the real takeaway. How do you fit into this? Ask yourself, how do you fit in? Now, on the work-life balance, people were saying in order to get a better balance, they were prepared to give up some of their salary. Now, there was 17% of people, which obviously is not a majority, it's a lower amount. 17% of people said they were willing to give up as much as a day's salary to have a better work-life balance. And that would obviously presumably mean they spend more time with their family and friends. And what was interesting, that actually links back to a podcast we did a while ago about money and happiness. And one of the big findings of a recent survey was that money doesn't directly buy you happiness, it buys you time, because you can pay people to do the things you don't want to do, and therefore give you time to do what you want, which is spend time with family and friends. But the other bigger things that people were prepared to do was 37% of people who were asked in this survey were willing or would like to work from home and don't at the moment. 20% would said they would like to go self-employed, it would make them happier. Others said they would change their job, that was one of the sort of mid-range ones, and early retirement came in at about 29%. We'd all like to retire early, let's be honest. But what was the key takeaway is that people want a better work-life flexibility. So they want to be able to, if you're an employer out there, it was really a message that was aimed about to individuals. But for me, the big message was to employers. If you want to make your employees happy, more likely to stay, then it was the ability for employees to be slightly more flexible and therefore spend a bit more time at home, but they're still working, that would make them happy. So I thought it was a great survey. It pulled out a few interesting points, but the key thing is that I banged on about in all of these shows was that people are good at articulating what they want, but they don't take action. So make sure, if it's you need to build a plan, and that goes back to being financially independent. We did a podcast recently about my views on how you do that. The 10 rules I did last week, go back and listen to them. And it's all about control. I think people are wanting to have more control over those uncertainties, and you need to do that by planning. And it goes back to the idea of working out what is the minimum you could survive on. And I think people have a little bit more flexibility than they initially think. If you look at the money that you could probably cut back on those frivolous things like Sky TV or whatever, I'm not saying you have to live the life of a monk, but if you really had to cut back and see what you could do, if there was some form of emergency, then you would. So if you want to change your life, then what you need to do is you really need to try and do that exercise before, and then be able to make some changes. So it was a good survey, and I liked the piece.
Yeah, absolutely. Take action. I think so many people get to the point of writing a list, and they feel that because they get it out on paper and they get it out of their brain and down onto a piece of paper, writing that list of things that they want to achieve and they want to do, it's almost like that's the end goal for them, and actually it's not. It's about taking action then and making sure you're ticking off those checklists.
One of the interesting ones was being self-employed. Now, somebody who's been self-employed, it isn't necessarily this nirvana. People do tend to feel they work harder sometimes, but it's the flexibility to choose when you work. And I saw a wonderful quote earlier on this week from somebody who was a bit of a a business, not guru, but someone who provides advice to people. And by saying this, I'm going to probably make this podcast now X-rated, but it was saying if you start something, you build your own business, then you'll never have to work for a dickhead again. I thought that was quite a nice line, because if there's any other reason to start your own business, and I've worked with plenty of those in my time. So good, that was the first piece. Now, before we go on to the second piece, I wanted to just tell people about a new initiative that I came up with last week.
When you said, before we go on to the next piece, I thought you were going to say, Andy, can you demist the windows? Because we are getting a bit steamed up.
I can't see out the window at the moment. I know there's no need to see out of a window when you're doing a podcast, but
there's two men gesticulating wildly in a car with steamed up windows. This could be over the local police station.
I'm expecting the police to pull up at some point. If they do, then we can chat.
The new initiative. Sorry, Damien.
Yeah, the new initiative. Now, I've got a real thing about doing money stuff and talking about money, and Money to the Masses has been going for so long now and gets out to people via the website, the podcast and the books we do, things like the radio shows we were doing this week. And somebody said to me about why we do this, and it really made me think that one of the big things that we need to try and encourage people to do, and we've touched upon it once or twice, it's a theme that I come back to, but I've only just been able to articulate it really, is that we need to encourage people to be engaged and excited about money. So you can try and give people all the information in the world. The only way you're going to really get them to make changes and become more financially literate. But let's remember, when you were at school and would talk things about history, you couldn't name any of those dates and things now. So financial education on its own at schools and things won't necessarily work. What you need to do is make people inquisitive and show them the wonder. I know that sounds funny, but make life a bit of a puzzle so they'll try and solve. Now, how I'm going to try and do this even more is I've set up an initiative, and you're going to see this go on social media, our Facebook page, Instagram, Twitter. I'm doing 100 money videos in 100 days. Now, the 100 came about because you get the usual press releases about 100 days till Christmas, and I thought, well, do you know what? Let's commit to something. 100 days. There is no tie to Christmas in effect, but it's just 100 days. I'm doing 100 money videos, and they're typically a minute long, where we give insights, and I want people to engage and share this stuff, and it's going really well at the moment and being shared a lot, but we want people to ask questions, talk. We want to start a conversation, so it's all about starting a conversation, and the videos go under the hashtag we need to talk about money. So go in and even look for that hashtag on social media. You'll find me typically in front of a whiteboard talking about all sorts of stuff, and there's a really good one tomorrow that's going to come out talking about how to clear credit card debt quickly. So do check that out, and we're going to do this. I've committed to it. 100 days. Let's go for it. Right, the next piece is from a reader. I've forgotten his name now. I've misplaced it as a result of last week's show, and he just wrote in and said, look, it's a possible question for your future show. I'll read the whole thing out. His investments took a bit of a turn last week because the pound soared against other currencies. I'll explain why that did that in a minute. This was just after a minor whisper that interest rates might go up. Oh, look, he's explained it actually in the question. How will markets react when the interest rates do go up? Should we be switching to funds that hedge against this? By the way, I've used this gardening term, it means the hedge word, here, but I don't really understand it. Could you possibly explain? So I'm going to go through this. Right. What happens is if you buy something in a foreign country, in a foreign currency, there's a currency exchange going on because you buy it in pounds and you're going to have to go and buy this thing in a foreign currency. So let's use a real example. If you bought a house over in Spain, it's in euros. What happens is your pounds would have to go and buy that house over in Spain. You're going to have to convert into euros so to buy that house. Now, what's important is the exchange rate you get, because if you need 100,000 euros, for example, to buy the house, then how many pounds that equates to is very much dependent on the exchange rate, how many euros you get for your pound. Now, what can happen is if the currency rate suddenly rapidly moves after you've agreed to buy it, so then suddenly, let's just use round numbers, so let's say £100,000 equated to 100,000 euros. If the pound suddenly weakened against the euro, you could find yourself needing £120 to buy those 100,000 euros. So for the person in Spain, they still got their 100,000 euros for the house, but it's cost you £20,000 more because of the currency exchange, 20% more. And that does happen, and that's why when people buy things abroad in like large quantities, so big sums, they will use hedging. They will go and get somebody who's a currency expert to fix the rate at which they buy. Now, the ability to minimise that impact is called hedging. So you hedge your bets. It's a bit like when you go bet on football, you might hedge against something by betting against the opposite thing happening. So what you're trying to do is really fix the currency rate at which you're trying to buy something. So you might bet against the currency moving up or down. It's called hedging, so you don't have to get into the nuance of how it works. But what it means is that we use the example of a house there. If you buy funds, so in your pension or your ISA that buy shares over in Europe, then those shares are priced on that local exchange, which is in euros. So the same thing happens while the share prices go up and down, which will affect the value of your investment. Also, the currency rates change. So what you can get in effect is if you get swings in currency, even if the stock market rallies over in Europe, so in effect this value of those shares in euros goes up, if the value of the pound moves in the opposite direction, when you convert those profits back, then you can actually end up losing out. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
So again, just to give you to really drill down into that example, if the value of the shares went up in euro terms, then they went from 100 euros to 120 euros, and if the euro had weakened against the pound, then you can actually find that those euros, when you convert it back, they won't be worth £100 now. They might only be worth 90. So it's really important that sometimes people think about it, because they don't realise when they invest they are actually open to currency moves. Since Brexit, currencies have had a massive impact on our investments, because the moves have become far wilder and greater, more volatile. Because don't forget, the pound has fallen between 15 and 20% at different times against most major currencies. So what happens is those currency moves do affect your portfolio. So in the case of this chap, the reason why his funds took a hit, the value of the underlying assets didn't particularly, but what happened is that because interest rates were being talked about going up by Mark Carney, when interest rates go up, it makes the currency more attractive. So think of it like a bank account. If suddenly the rate goes up on a bank account on the high street, everyone wants that bank account. This kind of works similar with currency. So if the rate's going to go up by a central bank for a particular currency, it's more attractive to investors and speculators. So what happened is the currency got stronger because rates went up, and because of that, the pound rallied. So exactly like the example I gave there with the euros and the shares, the pound rallied against everything else. So in any currency pair, the pound rallied against the euro. What it means is the euro was suddenly weaker against the pound, and therefore, even though the stock markets were generally moving up only a bit, because of the huge swings, they moved 2.5% in a matter of days. Effectively, his funds fell 2.5% in days, which is quite a big move. So that's why he looked at his portfolio and thought, wow, what happened? So how you stop that is you'd hedge. You'd buy funds that maybe hedged out that currency exposure. There aren't as many that don't, because it's costly to do it. So it actually eats into the return, so fund managers aren't always keen to necessarily do it. And if you have lots of different currencies that you're exposed to in a fund, it gets really, really expensive. So what happens is that there will be a point where you may want to start hedging, and being hedged is actually a positive. Now, since Brexit, the opposite is true, but the pound has suddenly increased in value, and the question he says is, how will markets react when interest rates really do go up? The truth is they probably won't do too much, because suddenly the reason the jump happens so quickly and it was so large is the market quickly repriced. They'd assumed that rates wouldn't go up for a couple of years, and suddenly Mark Carney went, they're going up now. So they repriced it on that assumption. So assuming that does happen, and Mark Carney does put rates up in November, December, and it's only just a nudge up by 0.25%, then the market might not do much more. And in fact, it could weaken even if they don't get quite what they thought, and he pushes back. So what you're going to see is that currency moves are going to be continually volatile. It's going to have a big impact. And sometimes trying to play the currency market, you can get caught on the wrong side. We've all enjoyed basically a 15% kicker from the falling currency markets over the last year. We're having a little bit of repricing back the other way. There will come a point probably when the trend becomes for an overall strengthening. We're not quite there now. It's very hard to call which way the pound is going to go against most currencies at the moment. We're really on a bit of a knife edge. So I can't say whether you should or shouldn't. It's a trend you're going to have to keep watching. So I hope I've explained what hedging is and why people will hear more about it in their portfolios and why it's important. Before we move on, Andy, I just wanted to quickly mention 80/20 Investor. Now, 80/20 Investor is my DIY investment service. Do go and check it out. I empower and teach people how to invest their own money. The service provides data-driven fund tables. The data is driven by my own unique 80/20 investor algorithm, which I created. You also get stop-loss alerts, you get research articles and insight, you get market commentaries, monthly commentaries and DIY investment lessons, but you also get access to my £50,000 portfolio, which is a portfolio of my own money, which I run live on the site for members to see, and it shows people how I use the service to maximise my returns. And in the first 2 years of doing so, I turned £50,000 into £59,500, which is a 19% return, beating investment managers, professional fund managers, financial advisors, investment banks, passive trackers in the market. So everybody can have a free 30-day trial of 80/20 Investor, and you can claim that by going to moneytothemasses.com and going and clicking on the 80/20 Investor hyperlink at the top of the page. So go and try the service. Let me know what you think of it, and I know from the feedback that you're going to love it. But for now, on with the show.
Okay, so the last piece is somebody who listens to our show has been talking about a particular subject that you wanted to bring up on the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, this subject's to do with car insurance, and it's something that I've personally experienced and then for try and avoid. It was somebody called Georgie Frost who had her own show on a radio station called Share Radio that is no longer in existence. It was a money show that went out there on the digital only, but it was quite popular. And she appears on lots of things to Sky, and appears on lots of radio shows now, especially doing money slots and on the news. And she's actually been I've met her, she's a lovely person, and she's always been very, very positive about our show, Andy, in lots of ways, and thinks it's one of the best things she's heard in a long time in the money realm. So I'm really appreciative of that. And actually, I just happened to be reading an article that said that 3 million people are making the same mistake year on year, which is cost them about £266 in relation to their car insurance. And I started reading it, and actually it was Georgie who was the main spokesperson throughout the piece, and she's doing something with one of the comparison sites. So the pitfall to avoid is the auto renewal. Now, it's worth banging on about this a bit, because the auto renewal thing that goes on.
The reason I'm laughing is I've recently auto renewed on both my car and home insurance, literally in the last few months.
Do you know what? It's so easy to do, and it is easier. And what we mean about this is, if you paying annually for your car insurance is cheaper than paying monthly, because what they do when you pay monthly, you're effectively getting a kind of a credit loan from them, because they're assuming you're going to repay it. So they end up charging you about an 11% premium. So on those insurances, it's better to pay it annually. But the problem is, when you go and pay it annually, what actually happens is you'll pay it, you'll give them your card. But what they don't tell you is, they don't sit there and say, whether they're supposed to or not, I do not know the exact rules, but they do not, and I know this from personal experience, they do not say, right, we're going to store your card details for future reference so we can auto-renew next year. Because what happens, you'll go through your renewal pack next year, it'll come to you and they'll send it to you, and they will just deduct the money again from you, so you don't lapse your insurance. And that's the excuse they use. But nearly always, and this is where the £266 comes from, typically you can save by shopping around, by using a comparison site. And this is a real bugbear of mine, because I've almost fallen foul of it a number of times, like everybody else, and probably have done in the past. But I've rung up insurers and they were about to auto renew, and I asked them, well, how are they going to do that? And they were going to use the card they had on their system. And I said, well, I didn't say you could have it. I said, oh no, we automatically save it. So the tip for me is that when you renew your insurance, or when you buy your insurance with a credit card or whatever you're going to pay, make sure you say to them, and by the way, can you not save that on your system? Because whether they should ask you, and they deliberately don't, or whether it isn't actually a legal requirement, they won't tell you that they're going to save it and therefore try and auto-renew. And of course, what that means, you need to be on the ball and put a reminder in your phone so the next year you do actually purchase some more car insurance or home insurance so you're not uninsured. But that's easy to do, and they will write to you anyway. So it's really just a reminder to people out there, is to make sure you know who is storing your card details, because what they will do is they will use that to auto-renew. And I know there are services out there that will still auto-renew even if your card expires and you get a new card, and there are Visa and people like that do it, and I've had that happen to me on various different services in the past. Sometimes it's been a positive because I haven't updated the details, but for a lot of people, the loss of control is a real issue.
Yeah, absolutely. National Trust do the same for me every year.
Do they?
I did it for a Christmas present for my wife one year. And so every year, just before Christmas, I have a huge whack, a couple of £100 comes out of the account, and it devastates me every Christmas. But it's a nice thing to have, and we do use it, so I shouldn't really complain. I'm certainly not lumping in National Trust with everyone else. Interestingly, in terms of the auto-renew, it happens as well on the monthly renewal, and that's even easier, isn't it, for them, because they've got your direct debit details.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's good to put a reminder in, however you do it.
Yeah, I try to. With the phones these days, you can put a reminder in, and I do it just because it's a good reason to try and shop around. And what normally happens is that all those things come out at the same time. That's the only thing with paying annually, is that you end up, for me personally, you get a real nasty period in the year where all those things come out. But, I mean, there are ways to mitigate that if you try and get... I don't try and encourage people to have credit, but if 0% purchases on credit cards, it means you could actually stagger that over a year and repay it in the same kind of way by a monthly instalment, but without the 11% interest applied by the insurer. So there are ways around it, or you save up effectively for the next years and then have the money. So shop around, people.
Good. Are we done?
We are done, Andy. It's really humid in here, isn't it?
It's. I don't like to use the word moist, but it is getting there. I quite like it though.
I do. I'm starting to feel like I'm in a sauna.
Yeah.
You know that feeling where you find it hard to breathe. But we are done, Andy. Until next week, make sure you leave plenty of reviews for us on the podcast.
Yeah, we haven't had reviews in the last couple of weeks. It's been a bit slow on the review front. So another reminder out there, another begging reminder, please do review the podcast. It helps so much because it really does help us fly up the iTunes charts. And it's the only thing we ask of you. We don't ask money.
Yeah,
that's all we ask.
We don't ask money. And I think with the thousands and thousands of people we see who download the podcast every week, if you listen to this, do go and put a review, because we're just underneath the 100 mark on reviews, and so if we got another, say, 15 reviews, which we should be able to do in seconds if people did this and were listening on their phones and went and gave a review, we'd surpass that. So please do. It would make me and Andy immensely happy. I know it's not easy on a mobile phone, but if you go on a phone and search for the podcast, don't go via this is on iPhones and iTunes, don't go via the downloads that you have. If you go back and search for the podcast, if you didn't even know what it was, you are able to leave a review via that route. I don't know why it's like that, and I wish it was easier and less clunky, but that's how you do it. So yeah, please leave a review, and that's it, Andy. We're done, and until next week.
Oh, and if you do want to get in touch with Damien, make sure you email him at podcast@moneytothemasses.com or via Twitter, money2themasses with a number 2. Until next week.
Until next week, Andy.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.